Ladies and gentlemen, it's now 2 o'clock and our meeting is being recorded. Oh, are you going to say that? Is that your own? No. Our meetings are being recorded and will be available to the public later on today. Welcome to this meeting, the Environment and Climate Change Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live to the County Council website. Will also be available for viewing after the meeting. I'm chairing the meeting today as Mr. Frisbee has sent his apologies for the meeting. Please can all members and officers have their microphone on mute until they wish or are invited to speak. I need to let you know that we're not expecting a fire alarm today, so if one does sound, please use the stairs to leave the building and convene on the field opposite the visitors' car park. Please follow the Democratic Service officers. I welcome to this meeting the Cabinet Lead Member for the Environment, Mr. Blake Payne. Welcome, sir. He's in front of me. Thank you. The first item of the minutes is the previous meeting, which are on pages 5 to 10 of your agenda. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of September have taken as read and confirmed and signed. Is everybody in agreement with that? Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Item 3 is questions asked by members under standing orders. I've received a question from Mr. Hunt. The question and its response have been circulated to members of the committee prior to the start of this meeting, and I will take as read. I would like to remind members that no discussions can be held on this. Mr. Hunt, do you have a supplementary question you would like? Yes, I'd like to remind you that your supplementary question should be to clarify the reply that you've been given and should not raise any new issues. Mr. Hunt.
Don't have a supplementary, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. I'd now like to ask officers whether they are able to respond, and that's
He's not asked to supplement.
yeah, okay, yeah. Thank you. Right. So we move on to item 4. I've not been notified of any urgent items. Item 5 is declaration of interest in respect of items on the agenda. We've not had that. Do any members have any interest that they wish to declare? I do regarding item number 1, because my wife is very ill with vascular dementia, which is now we're told is probably through air conditioning, air quality. So just make that declaration. Thank you. Number 6, declarations of party whips. Do any members wish to declare the party whip? No, thank you. Item 7, I've not received any petitions. Agenda item 8, our first substantive item is a report on air quality and health partnership and action plan 24 to 28. These are on pages 11 to 26 of the agenda pack. Mike Sandy is a Director of Public Health and Jenna Parton, specialist in the wider determinants of health, join us today to present this report. Welcome to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Could I just add an additional members of the Health Overview Scrutiny Committee to be invited to participate in the item, and I welcome you to the meeting. That's Mrs. Newton online, Mrs. Seaton present in the room, and Mr. Morgan online. Welcome to all 3 of you. Thank you. Right.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start with that one. Just a reminder that as per paragraph 5, my role, the Director of Public Health role, comes with a responsibility to make certain plans are in place to deal with threats to the public's health. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're my plan, but I need to be assured that there is a plan to deal with those threats to public health. And one of those threats is air quality and air pollution for the reasons, one of the reasons being what the Chair said. And as such, the protocol over the last few years has been that, given that both myself and the Director of Environment and Transport have got a vested interest in this, and through a transport and environment point of view, me from a public health point of view, it is a bit of a joint work on this one, but it reports into this committee with the Health and Overview Scrutiny Committee chair and spokes invited too. So that's kind of why we're here. As I say, and as paragraph 5 says, air pollution is one of those threats. We kind of discharge that kind of planning through our air quality partnership work. That's not because, in terms of what I can do about it, it's not as if I've got a service where I can deploy officers and go, can you fix air quality tomorrow? It is one that relies on the organised efforts of a number of people, my colleagues in Environment and Transport and within the County Council, but also notably the District Council and increasingly the NHS. Now the NHS have come back to their role, if you like, in terms of what they can do for tackling health inequalities and in their role as a major employer. So from that point of view, we have put in place an air quality partnership over the last few years. We did have a strategy which ran from 2024 to 2028, which put in place a number of actions. And I come to you today with kind of two things, one of which is a review, because we said we'd do an annual review to this committee on progress that we've made. And there's partly this, but also we are in the process of refreshing our strategy. I should have said previous strategy was 2020 to 2024. The new strategy is 2024 to 2028. So we're also coming to the committee for your views on the intended actions within the action plan that's appended to the report prior to it being submitted to the Cabinet, hopefully for approval at the December Cabinet meeting. So I won't go in terms of the background of air quality. I'm sure you're all very aware, as per paragraph 10, as to why it's a big issue. But I think at that stage, I'll hand over to Jenna to maybe take you through some of the detail of the intended priority areas for the forthcoming strategy, the 24 to 28 one. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Mike. And Chair, my thoughts to you and your wife was very difficult. So thank you for letting us know. I suppose the premise of this plan is very much outdoor air quality as well. It's something that we've discussed as a partnership, whether we could move into indoor air quality, just with reference to your mention of air conditioning, and we do some work on damp and mould. We have environmental health attend from districts at the moment, so it's very much an outdoor air quality focus, but that could be something we look at incorporating through our wider work through indoor as well, if that was an aspiration. So as briefly discussed by Mike, 2019 there was a joint strategic needs assessment chapter done on air quality, outdoor air quality and health, and we had an action plan that we updated on specific actions in 2023. Since that meeting and from a product of that meeting, it was decided that we would do an updated health needs assessment. I think it was really important, particularly post-pandemic, with potential for different ways of movement, different modes of movement, different patterns for us to have a look at. And there were some sizable publications, such as the Chief Medical Officer's report that focused on air quality, and kind of give us a little bit of an idea about how much more widely we should be working and what new evidence was coming up in the areas such as dementia. There was an emerging evidence base, and also perhaps how we might work better as partners to look at how we might widen our scope and add that value. So we're not perhaps coming as a partnership. I felt perhaps before we might be coming for the previous action plan and not all updating on what we were doing as partners singularly. And I felt it was really important in the new action plan that we might capture that collaboration and that extra value that we might bring as working together. So we steered the air quality and health partnership since the last meeting to this meeting. We've run them and we've had updates from organisations such as the university, which again is a new angle that we've taken upon us. And we've had updates from Environment and Transport and some really great dialogue, I think, from within Environment and Transport and the districts, namely because now I joint chair the partnership with Jan and Walker from Environment and Transport. I think it's really, really important to have that joint approach. And I think that's really includes that dialogue. We've had some really, really productive meetings, sometimes almost running over our time. So we've had some great, great conversations. Okay. So from that, we've done the health needs assessment. So we ran that as a structured health needs assessment. We had the group was a stakeholder group. Everyone was asked to contribute. Different types of data was added in. Different types of data was debated, monitored versus model data, and what was most appropriate, what we had, what gave us the information we need, and what strategies were out there, and what work the districts, ourselves and other organisations were doing. So we could kind of have a look at what was going on, what the need was. We had new things like our Joint Strategic Needs Assessment chapter on health inequalities that adds a bit more information for us on groups and geographical areas that might be more at risk, on top of what we know around the groups that are most vulnerable to air quality from Public Health England and OHID's data. So we had a look at that. Then we had a look at perhaps where the gaps might be and what we might create from the action plan that might mitigate some of those risks that were left from those gaps. So that led to some objectives, and there are 7 objectives that you will find in your pack, that I thought were particularly, and the group agreed as part of these ongoing meetings we had, and pertinent to pushing through that collective action and that accountability on what we're doing. So I think leadership came out as very important from some of the strategies and policies nationally, and I don't think we're capturing that in the previous action plan so well. What can we do as a group to take the leadership on this area? What can we do to make ourselves accountable by reporting? So that's been put in place, and we report to the Staying Healthy Partnership, and I did a report last in May on our development. But how might we lead? How might we give our information so we can capture where we can get the most impact for what we're doing? And how might we be those people that raise that information, raise that need around health and air quality? And routinely influencing urban design. That's something that I would report on previously, perhaps around my work with local plans that I'm doing in my previous, my substantive role. But as a group, we then explored how we might respond to consultations, and actually as a wider group, we might respond to some of the issues that have come out of urban design. And we've spoken before, I went to an OB and Wigston committee. We spoke a bit about how we might have collective responses and collective objectives to that urban design and air quality and health. Increasing active travel and communications was carried over from the previous action plan, but I think there's more detail around that as well, especially having the joint chairing around the active travel. That's been a very big part of our agenda. And also with the communications, it was a little bit more around how we might target those communications. We might actually make the best use of the data we have. Previously, we've done things like Clean Air Day, which are brilliant, and the wide-ranging blanket approaches to getting air quality messages out there. What we've been able to do with our group and the districts is use the information from things such as Zephyrs in the areas that are more widely covered, such as Blaby, and trial some things. So how could we get the information about where the hotspots are, where the risk might be to those most vulnerable, and how can we get the message to them? So we have a website that has mapping around air quality. Blaby managed to get some monies because of part of the partnership and the action plan we're going to be working towards to connect their information. So we have that on a map. We have it in that one area because they've managed to get the funding through grant funding, and they've got the largest coverage, so we can really try and see what works. I've managed to then link up with colleagues from primary care in Blaby. So we're thinking about how we might get those messages out. So actually colleagues that work in primary care can access that information and see if there are people that are perhaps frequent flyers to appointments or need that support. Could they give advice on how people can protect themselves from that harm, that core public health duty that we have? Or perhaps amend the way they travel on that day, etc. We've got that live information, and that can really make a difference. And we haven't really used that before. We might have monitored, thought it's under a threshold. I might have had some challenge around that there being no safe threshold in public health for air quality. And we might have had that debate and that talk, but what have we done with that? So hopefully that's something that's in the action plan that we can trial, evaluate and roll out further. There's also some focus on densely populated areas. Before, again, we've looked at perhaps areas where we have the monitoring in place, air quality management areas. There's been some changes in that area. But with densely populated areas, we're looking at where we can affect the most people, the interventions that we do. It links back to that leadership. So can our colleagues in our districts tell us where there might be areas of risk in these densely populated areas? And that came out quite strongly from the Chief Medical Officer's report, that we might be able to work with our vulnerable groups in. Another example of something that I think is a little bit more ambitious is working with industry and agriculture, exploring how we perhaps can look at those key locations in the area, those areas of other organisations in industry or farming, etc., agriculture, those industries, and how can we work? Could be that we do some education from upcoming farmers, educational establishments, or really mapping what we could do in that area as well. And then aligning our health work to our climate change and net zero and biodiversity targets. I think we've always worked very well with colleagues, but we've now got some support through me setting the action plan in place from one of our public health registrars to really map those co-benefits how might we get the most out of what we're doing together and work really succinctly. And again, so that was something that came quite strongly out of the Chief Medical Officer's report again. So really the health action plan, the air quality and health action plan for the partnership, it just aims to promote that joint working. I think the production of the health needs assessment associated plan, as I say, has got us all talking and all quite passionate about working together as well. We've got some action on leadership, we've got some action, say, on active travel, keeping that at the top of our agenda as well. And we've linked to the Health and All Policies rollout. So how might we take our learning from Health and All Policies organisation where we're at Leicestershire County Council and roll it out with our district colleagues to make these considerations routine? It's not just air quality, it's not just monitoring, it's how it's impacting our populations. And hopefully we can bring together, and I can come back and I can give you updates. We're keeping, I've got quarterly updates on there mapped out, as you can see, to start with. I've spoken to business intelligence colleagues who are working around particulate matter, which is one of the biggest risks to our public health outcomes. And we can really capture numbers and give you back real smart outcomes of what we're trying to do. So that's what I've tried to frame this action plan to be able to give you as well. I think I've, oh, sorry. That's what I say, I hope I've covered everything. Maybe not.
No, I think that's great. Just before we conclude, just want to thank Jenna and indeed Jana as well for the work in taking this forward. I think from my point of view, could have embarrassed Jenna now. Probably what we had going back a few years ago was a partnership. I'm tempted to say it's easy partnership working is when you get people around the table and go, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And you don't really do anything different. You just bag the individual contributions of organisations and pass it off as partnership work. But hopefully from the examples that Jen has given around, for instance, the admissions work and the monitoring work, there's a real sense with this partnership now of actually getting sort of some added public health value into it by thinking about how do we use data to then inform interventions on our most at-risk groups. So Jenna and Jenna, I think, have done a great job, as well as being a fantastic example of alliterative co-partnership. So I'll end there.
Thank you, and I would warmly endorse those comments, Jenna. It was most extraordinary in detail and length, and very, very good indeed. Would I now move on to our Mr. Payne as the lead member? Do you have anything you'd like to add at this stage, Mr. Payne?
Well, other than my thanks to public health directors in presenting and compiling this report, just to record, I think Louise Richardson is the lead member for public health. So I welcome that public health have brought it to the Environment Committee. Has already been identified as some close interconnections between the agenda of the Environment Committee and air quality per se. Indeed, we monitor air quality in our reports, quarterly reports. So I thank Public Health for sharing this information. And as the conclusion of the report says, it invites the committee to comment upon the vision of the report. And I'm looking forward to hearing what the committee members have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. The hands before I even have the words out of my mouth. Yes, Mr. Bolter, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, a couple of things. First of all, we had the WEES project in South Wixton, which had some effect. I don't know if you're fully aware of that. No? Well, I think Mike knows about it.
But I work on the school, the South Wixton. We've updated you on the partnership project we work with.
Yes.
Parkland School.
That's it.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yes, that's the one. Yes.
I
wonder if that's going to be rolled out elsewhere in the county. It's been quite successful there, and it might be rolled out in other parts of the county. That's the first question. And the second one is, I suppose, a bit of criticism. Not like me, I know. But we had a problem in South Wixton where we had a new development. Opportunity was there to get the bus off the road by bus lay-by, but Highway Friends didn't agree with that. So the bus now parks on the road. We have traffic backed up. I thought, well, that's one of those things. And then just recently, we've done away with the bus lay-by outside the Wixton pool. So now we've got the bus waiting on the highway and traffic backing up behind the bus. So we failed once, now we've failed twice. The idea is to get the buses off the road so the traffic can actually flow, but now we're actually blocking the road while the bus loads children on and off. at school times and throughout the day. Now, I'm just a bit concerned that perhaps I should have learnt that lesson, but following on, when the bridge is demolished next summer, I now understand the line is going to be lowered and there's going to be traffic lights put on there, so it's going to be half bridge open, so we're going to have traffic queuing there. Is there any way we can actually divert some of the traffic away from that area so that we don't have such a massive problems that I can see we're going to have next summer?
Okay, thanks. So shall I let Jenna do the rollout of the Louise project first, and then Anne, can I look to you for the bus?
Apologies, Mr. Bolter, I mustn't know the acronym for it, but yeah, heavily involved in that project. So that's something that came out of the hospital admissions data that we actually got. So then OB Wigston paid for the monitoring. So really be about evaluating from that monitoring. We brought together the public health team, Choose How You Move teams. I think it's a really good example, which is in the plan of partnership working, and very much so. Blaby are very keen to replicate, but I just wanted to evaluate what difference that had made at different times of the day and seasonally. So perhaps we could look at how we could do that the best, but absolutely, definitely through the vehicle of the partnership, I think it'd be really good to get volunteers to do that as well, and hold people to account if they don't want to, why we're not doing that in certain areas where there's public health concern around air quality. So yeah, really keen to do that. Thank you.
Right. Yes, please, Mrs. Page, and then. Oh, sorry,
Hang on,
Anne.
Anne
Sorry.
wanted to. Sorry, if I could just come in on a couple of the other points, if that's all right, Chair, before you move on. On the buses on the carriageway, I don't know the specifics about what's changed there, but yes, absolutely. You can have a lay-by to get the bus off the carriageway and the traffic is free flowing, or you can purposely still have the bus stopping on the carriageway because yes, the other traffic has to wait, because often a bus can have quite a lot of difficulty getting back into the traffic flow. Now, ultimately, it's about where's your policy kind of direction going? What is it you're trying to say to the public? Are we trying to encourage and support public transport, make it as easy and reliable as possible? You know, all that comes into the dynamics. So there isn't an easy answer because, yes, there's pros and cons of both. I don't know the specific instance, but isn't it as simple as one thing's good and the way to go and the other one isn't? They both have pros and cons, so you have to kind of weigh them up. Ultimately, we'll always be looking at highway safety and safety for bus users as well. So we have to put that into the mix there. So just a wee bit of context. And the other point about the bridge and the closure, I'm assuming, sorry, that's a Network Rail works. We have long, extensive conversations because obviously it's part of the Middle and Mainline electrification and they're working their way up the county. So we have got really good links now because we've had lots of challenges through the southern part of the county, and we'll be working really hard on the best option when that closure has to happen. One, to keep it to a minimum, but two, to try and manage, because we know it's going to be really challenging because that's a very busy road.
Right, thank you. Mrs. Page.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for this report and very comprehensive presentations. Now, my first question was going to be, as it says Partnership Action Plan, how do you ensure this is not working in silos, but actually your action plan sets out that you are working across different departments like children and young people, etc., etc. So my follow-on question then is, because it is, how are you working with other districts? Because you refer to Oadby and Wigston, but there's Harborough, there's Hinckley, etc., etc. So how do you work with those? And how do you ensure that all of this work feeds into their local plans? Because it's got to be in there in the early stages. So thank you very much.
So thanks for the question. All districts attend their partnership meeting routinely. I think that's when I mentioned about how we sometimes overrun, because I think it was such good conversation, such widely over each area. So the districts have a standing agenda item where they're asked to update on progress. And that's the examples I give with Blaby and OB and Wigston are just because really, I suppose we've pushed initially because the hospital admissions data was high in those areas. So we asked for some more immediate action. But other areas are then watching, and with the OB Wigston project. I do believe as part of the South Leicestershire Sports Partnership, they've actually trialled and taken some parts and taken that to Hartborough already. So not in its entirety, but the things that they've seen have been quick wins. That's already gone across that area as well. Routinely, public health are asked to sign off annual status reports. So they come in, and because of this partnership and the continuing dialogue we have, Mike signs those off as Director of Public Health, so we can see the actions that are in the annual status reports, which are to differ from districts, and we have all of those through. And we're given opportunity to ask for things around, like to add in often that you haven't mentioned, choose how you move. Please could we have that in, and things like that as well. And that sort of preventative action in the action plan at the end, so we're able to comment on that. And the other part of my job, although it's quite wider determined, is local plans. Don't sleep much at the minute. They're all going through at a similar time. So we've been able to draft strategic health impact assessments on 4 so far, of the 6 that are going through currently. And air quality is a key environmental consideration within the health impact assessment. So we'll be looking at key policies and assessing how that might have an impact, positive, negatively, in what term, and how we might mitigate that from a health impact assessment point of view. So that's being conducted on local plans. And there's also standalone health policies that we're asking and advocating to be embedded within that as well. So that would all make the link. But we have discussed having a planner as a rep on the incrementally, perhaps not every time because they're very, very busy people, but as there is something that might come up in the action plan that might be to do with planning, I sit on strategic planning group, so I could ask someone to come and sit on that group and be that link as well and give that advice.
Just to come back, okay, that sounds really good, and I'm glad you explained it because that's one of my huge concerns. So signing off and sitting on that is the way you monitor it, that the district adhere to it and to put it actually, and that's your form of monitoring it by signing it off. Because you see, you could work, but they might totally ignore it. So just to ensure that they don't ignore. So thank you.
Yeah, indeed. And I know it's a challenge that I've sort of said to Jenna about what's the long-term vision for wider determinants, because I think, as I said in my concluding remarks, we've kind of moved from a position of kind of were we adding value to where we can do. I would love the system to get to the stage where we have trained officers, as you do as well as part of the day job, that they do all that for us and districts take on the kind of mark their own homework, and we can then be assured that everything's happening. I think, as you said, Jenna, at the moment, there's no amount of double running because we're trying to build that capacity, but there is no substitute for working with districts and acting more as that kind of check and challenge and sign off and doing the commenting, as Jenna said, in terms of those local plans. And I was going to ask you, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of a pain is it to have 5 local plans come through at once? But I'll leave that one go. So there is that one, isn't there? How much do you build capacity and let others run with what should be their responsibility, and how much do you step in and make certain it happens? And that's a bit of a challenge at the moment for capacity.
Mr. Hunt, I think, did you wish to speak? Oh, well done.
Yeah, I'd agree with the points that have been made, particularly about the risks of dealing in silos, but that's old chestnut. But I think Mike has indicated the determination within the department. My particular focus in the report is on the yellow pages. It's not numbered, but it's the active travel one, and you've referred to that in your discussions with Jenna. I too have had discussions with the transport department, and also with district local plans. And I wonder sometimes whether you'd do better to wait for them to publish something and then object to it, because in these, you know, cosy discussions, at least in my cosy discussions, it's always come out as well, the societal objections to this, or we've got to work with societal means. And when I've discussed the LPT4, which is in production, the answers come back, yes, we're very, very, very keen on active travel, but in fact we're doing a lot on walking, cycling, so on, but also on roads and rail and public transport. They're all treated equally, which gives you no priorities to work on. So I'm quite sort of sceptical whether without leadership, we will always sort of bow to the last word on what society has to say. And as we've seen, just as an analogy, as we've seen in Spain recently on the climate change problem, nobody's particularly interested in perhaps measures to reduce climate change until there's a huge flood, and then they say, what have you been doing? And I have to say, the same would be true of someone who's suffering from a respiratory illness as well. You don't see it before you're on top of it. So I just urge you to be much stronger on this and to be sceptical of what's in some of these strategies, because all the strategies want to say nice things to please everybody, including myself and Rosita and Bill and so on. But at the end of the day, it often comes down to what the officers in the department, how strongly the officers in a planning department are prepared to push things. And to that extent, I have to say the Department of Transport, the transport planners here, are really excellent because they've got a firm eye on what the design guides are and so on. But they often don't translate down to the local level unless you actually push it. I've had my say again on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you. That's fine. Is anybody else? Oh, yes. Mr. Payne, please.
Yeah, please indulge me, Chairman. I know I'm the lead member here to be scrutinised, but this report, as I mentioned in my preamble, has predominantly come from Public Health, and as the report says, the Director of Public Health has a statutory duty to ensure the plans are in place. But as ever, these debates raise interesting questions, and like the members here, I'm just curious as to I know that the Public Health Department have an action plan and will comment upon air quality considerations with regards to local plans, etc. But is it the case, much like an applicant is responsible for offering up the detail to any application themselves, whether it be around traffic or etc., or does the Public Health Department go out and actually assess the impact of said proposals in a local plan, and then take a view as to how the application fits with, you know, the assessment? So what I'm getting at is how reliable is the information that the Public Health Department rely upon to make considerations in terms of the various local plans that the planning authorities have a duty to provide?
Would you like to answer that? Now we're talking legal now, responsibility in planning. Obviously, there are people who are legally entitled to have a say in every application as a responsible body, but I've never heard of health being part of that, so that'll be interesting to listen to the response to this.
Do you want to have a crack? I suppose all we can do is to go through what you do and what you do consider, don't you?
And so thank you for the question. So part of the local plan work, I mentioned the strategic health impact assessments on the plan itself and the possibility of the policy. I've been working hard with, I'd say, six of the plans that are going through currently to embed health impact assessment requirements within the local plan as part of the health policy, which then turns the ask based around what threshold is stated within the plan to become a statutory ask or a legal ask. So that can be enforced by development management colleagues to say, there's this number of units, we have it in our local plan, we'd like you to consider health impacts. I'm also quite keen to embed that in health inequality areas from our JSNA data. I'm not sure if I'll definitely get that in this round, but I'm trying. If not, it'll be numerically based. And then, as I say, we've got a standard Leicestershire health impact assessment table, which has environmental considerations in there, which is in air quality. So I'd be expecting to see things from developers in there on the impacts of health, on health from the air quality impacts of what they're proposing. And then we're working as a wider team to be able to assess these and question what's the content within that.
And is that, I'm going to ask you a question to try and listen. I should know this. It's like a one-to-one, isn't it? So the starting point is a broad sense of, here is a local plan. Does this development have an impact on health? And you can almost, you know, like when health impact assessment started out as relatively new, you know, you give it 1 tick if it's got an impact, 2 tick it's got a bit more of an impact, and 3 ticks. probably got to a stage now where you say if you've got something that says like this number of units, you can have a better informed sense of the impact. That's not the same as having the resource and the data to be able to say this will equate to this number of admissions to asthma, this number of that and the other. I think that's where we'd like to get to, but I suppose with somewhere, you know, if that's the 3-stage, we're probably at 1.75. Would that be fair?
That's particularly fair, and that was a learning point from the Hinckley Rail Freight response, actually. We were able to ask if they'd considered vulnerable people within that, which is part of the health impact assessment. The answer was a no, it's a generic population impact. We were saying, can you? And they were questioning us, well, tell us what difference that would make by numbers of what we've done with our impact assessment. And that's something I didn't have the expertise or data to do. And that's the aspiration, is to be able to strongly, perhaps as a region, if it's things like significant projects, or as a team at the very least, be able to strongly come in with that background and challenge on that behalf. And the districts were looking at monitoring and say it's below a threshold, it's okay. But from a public health perspective, I want to be able to argue that much more strongly. So that's a key aspiration. So thank you for picking up on that.
It's always a tricky one because it's like smoking, isn't it? Do we know that smoking kills you? Yeah. Do I know that that particular cigarette will kill you? No, I don't. So trying to balance an evidence base with the impact of an individual development is always a bit of a tricky one, unless you've got massive amounts of data and individual monitoring, which I suppose we're developing, but we're nowhere near yet.
Right, thank you for that. Other members, yes, please.
I think several of us, thank you, Chair, have sort of started. You just commented on individual plans, and Blake, I think you also asked the question on individual plans, and pinching at a phrase from Max, translating to the local issues. So we've got these in the local plan. How confident would we be that it will filter down to the individual but larger plans and the cumulative? I always have trouble with that word. The cumulative effect, is that taken into consideration for each individual plan so that it builds up? That's what my concern would be. Thank you.
And that was required, well, asked for when we were doing the work on the local plans. I don't know, with the national context and the national push on timelines, whether that was something we could do on this round, but that's something I'd like to do. So one of the points of the health impact assessment was proximity to other areas that were perhaps earmarked for development, or proximity to other areas that we'd monitored data, and it was there was potential risk to harm to health. So that's something we'd like to do. And I work closely, as I'm on the strategic planning group, I've asked to have a look at where development will be mapped, but then also put health layers over there of risk, so we can have a look as a county-wide footprint where those pinch points might be. And as you say, then it's not just done that individual piece by piece, because that seems wasted effort, and we don't have a lot of capacity and resource in this area. So we could maybe then look at those areas and say that's where we want to concentrate our efforts, and that's where we do our advocacy, and that's where we do our challenge in the main. So I'm looking to do it. This time's been such a rush with the local plans to get them through. So I think probably the key part for me would perhaps work with the strategic planning group to get that mapping done, and then we send my team the capacity we do have out there to try and influence them through our partners, and through the partnership it gives that way to do that as well, if that answered the question.
Yes, I'm sure that you're going to look at it. So thank you. And would that sort of equate to the S106, the conditions for the developments in future plans? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Yes, that's something with public health we've looked at, and directly. It's not something I suppose we could recommend things directly for, because it's a lot of capital things and we don't have the capacity to do that. So that's where we're looking at long term to build into where we influence the asks that Leicestershire County Council have on their section 106 asking me to, I can't speak, developer contributions, but also with the work with the districts through this piece of work, and through some work I'm doing with the Staying Healthy Partnership. I know there's lots of groups, sorry, but we talked last week about this and how we come together as a collective to not just look at policy, but look at how we do the healthy design throughout between the 5 years when they update the local plans, and how we might upskill people to feel more strongly in bat on our behalf and say, what are we doing here around what can we ask to help facilitate active travel, access to green space, etc., and much wider biodiversity and community as well, and climate. So we might have healthier design principles in what we're doing in between the policy plans as well, and then we could influence Section 106 through perhaps district asks or our wider organisational asks as well. It's all on my radar. It's just me and one other in my team, so we're trying to track everything. Okay.
Thank you very much for that. Anybody else? Is everybody's had their say, have they? What about people online? Is there anybody who'd like to contribute or ask questions? No? Okay, thank you. Right, so I've left myself till last. Wanted to listen to everybody else. Obviously, I have concerns at how this body operates and what they actually do, because I hear the word monitoring non-stop. We're monitoring this, we're monitoring that. The key word is measure. If you don't take measurements, how do you know what you're monitoring? Because when you measure through a Zephyr machine, you actually get proper pollution levels. So if you know that, you've got real live data, daily, hourly, that you can then look at and publish. Maybe in planning, if your S106 bid was to buy more Zephyrs or something, I don't know, that's sort of way over there. But anyway, it's just something that was said that really, and it's the core thing I want to come back to, but when I started, it was before my wife was ill, and it was with highways, and they was increasing the lanes on the bypass from Ashby de la Zouch up through to the top end of Colville. They're going to put strategic extra lane in, and DEFRA provided an overlay, and the overlaid Ashby roundabout was horrendous. It was even worse at the top end of Colville. So that was my first toe in the water. I think, gosh, what's all this about? So I went and spoke to a scientist who was unable to show me everything and explain. And so I started on a career of learning about air quality. So it wasn't a reaction to something. I was already in the game, and then I got more involved in that other respect. But my concern is, and I've already praised a wonderful document and listening to what's happening now, but air quality should be in every local plan. You should be watching it and monitoring it. If you are not using Zephyrs, you're out of the game. It's just, we all sit around. You've got to remember, I can remember 4 years ago when we were in the COVID era and we were being told by Mike this was going to happen, and we're setting up organisations and everything else with officers only, not members. And so we've come through that area. Now we're going to another 4 years and we're not measuring anything. So we've got nothing because we're not measuring it. So we're blindly walking along and doing what? Now, it's hard because we don't have a legal responsibility in this. We have got our Director of Health, who is highly esteemed, and I acknowledge all of his skills and endeavours. But at the end of the day, he's powerless in all of this because he's there to advise. But unless these districts are measuring, we have a real major problem, and air pollution's growing and growing and growing. In this document, it says air pollution has increased dementia risk. It's nothing like that. The scientists in NHS England, they were a wonderful office block and research lab just up from Euston Station in London. They totally said PM 2.5 is the cause. Now, for members, it's an educational thing, but if you would just allow me a little bit of indulgence on this, if you look at the thickness of a hair of your head, that's the vessels in your brain. Then if you look at 2.5, PM 2.5 and the particulate matter, it's half the thickness of a hair. So when they journey through the blood system and they bounce on the wall and they get caught there or they get caught there, then where you can see the scientists have worked it out and they know what's happening. And my deep concern is we could sit here for another 4 years and Jenna would come and provide us with fabulous, wonderful, the way she delivered the report, but there's no teeth in it. If you don't measure, you can monitor forever. You know, you can monitor the grass, and when it's big enough, you have to, long enough, you cut it. But we're doing nothing. We're innocent bystanders while the public at risk. And when they say in here, there's no human rights consequences of this report, wow, life is being threatened. It's recognised by professional scientists. So I would have caution on that, because I'm glad that our name isn't on the lid of this lot, because this is frightening, because they're consistently not doing it. Now, I guess it's because they run planning, and planning is a way of creating new developments, but it's also income for local authorities, and it just runs on and on. It comes as the same with business rates, big factories or big depots with plenty of lorries. It's all business rates, it's money. So that isn't being callous, but nobody's taking responsibility. They have the legal responsibility. So this group may go on and plan for the next 4 years, but unless you're measuring, well, back here in 4 years' time and looking at the next 4-year programme. Now, I don't know how you can overcome that, and that question is to Mike, obviously, because to a certain extent, I feel so sad because he's a prisoner in some ways. These people have the legal responsibility. Mike does not, but he attends. But if we're not going to measure, you'll never know. I know of one that bought Zephyrs after a long battle, and I said, oh, why are you measuring? Oh, we're measuring wood burning. Hang on, that's not till the winter. What are you doing through the summer? Now, we're looking at wood burning. Now, wood burning is small, but most people now are buying proper logs that you can burn, and it just goes on. So there is a deliberate, I believe, a most deliberate reason why they're not doing it now, you know. So, yes, please.
So you're just still on there, Mr. Harrison.
Yeah.
So there we go. So I think hopefully the committee, to my mind, is assured from what Jenna said, and that's why I wanted Jenna to give a flavour of some of the projects and the WEES project, as Mr. Bolter said. Is it a partnership that doesn't do anything? No, far from it. And I think that's the big change from a few years ago. Using, whether you call it measurement, whether you call it monitoring, the answer has got to be for a purpose. And whether that purpose is driving things like the WEES project, or whether it's in relation to the hospital admissions work that Jenna talked about, I think there's some really good projects in there that are taking that data and is doing something about it instead of just monitoring. That's not to say that it wouldn't be great to have a more comprehensive list of, Zephyrs or whatever across the whole of the Leicestershire area, but we are where we are. It's the nature of resources. I think in terms of building it into plans, etc. I'd be the first to say economic growth at the end of the day is good for health. If you haven't got economic growth, nobody's got jobs, then it makes my life very, very difficult indeed. But balancing that, as Jenna has done in terms of doing what we can via local plans, and again, acknowledge there's a journey there to get the monitoring and the measuring to a stage where we can really accurately depict the health impacts, is again something I think Jenna and the partnership have done really well. Then ultimately, I suppose there is an issue around the balance of priorities for any authority, whether that's economic growth, whether it's health. And I guess the thing about the strength of the partnership is trying to find a way of balancing those two. It'd be easy for me in a public health way, and many experience just going, I'll ban it, but equally that's not the best way of achieving good health either. So I haven't got a full answer to your points, other than hopefully the committee is assured that where we can, we are taking proportionate action and we are working in the right way with the right people to affect what we can. But it's it's never going to be a whole answer, but it is a balance of judgment.
Thank you, Mike. That's a standard response. Excellent. 10 out of 10. All I would say is to members, human life is the most important thing. And if we know actions can be taken to save them, surely we must think of doing that. as an urgency and not this global broad brush about jobs and it's this and it's everything else. You tell that to somebody who's seriously ill and families, and it will affect all people of all ages. And this is another problem that they're now looking at, because it's going to inflict other people. You digest, and it's as simple as that. So once you've got that pollutant inside, it's there. So anyway,
thank you.
It is complicated, but somebody else wishes to speak, so I'll certainly.
No, I'm sorry. That was, that was just a slip of the finger. Thank you. I'm sure you're moving on now. Thank you, Chair.
We've all had a good chance to deliberate on that. Can I ask for a show of hands in favour of the report, please, if you'd like to indicate? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right. No, I didn't deliberately. Abstained. All right, okay, thank you. I'd like to thank members of the Health and Overview Scrutiny Committee who have attended this afternoon, and also like to attend the officers. And I hope that you understand all comments made in the interests of good well-being. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you. Right, item 9. Item 9 is the future approach of residual and waste management post 2031. This is on pages 27 to 40 of your agenda pack. Joe Gall, Assistant Director and Waste Management, will present the report. So over to you, Joe. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just for committee, if I could just introduce Vicky Cormie. She's my Head of Service for Environment and Waste and has actually supported this piece of work. So I'll certainly help if we've got any questions at the end. So through you, Chair, the report is seeking views from this committee on the proposed future approach to managing residual waste from 2031 onwards, so that that feedback can then be reported on to Cabinet at its December meeting. Just by way of some context, in the previous decisions and background sections of the report, it states that we are looking to update the 2016 Cabinet decision on this matter, which at the time was agreed that we would merchant via a number of contracts, enter into contracts with market providers, and explore joint working opportunities with Leicester City. That's specifically because I think we've discussed them in the past at this committee. They are in a PFI arrangement which runs for 25 years, but it's due to end in 2028. So there is an opportunity, a timely opportunity, potentially to explore whether there's any benefit for both parties in working together. In that section of the report, it also alludes to sort of why we're looking to go back to Cabinet on this issue. So there's a need to take account of quite significant change on a national level, which, in terms of legislation, we've talked at this committee about things like the National Resources and Waste Strategy, which came into force in 2018, looks at things like reducing waste to landfill, moving to a circular economy. So thinking of waste as goods, keeping them in circulation for as long as possible before they fall out of the system as waste. And the wider Environment Act of 2021 with some of those net zero commitments in there. So a huge amount of change has happened since 2016, but in essence, all of that is aiming to reduce waste and increase recycling where it's relevant to this agenda. But we also will still need to consider changes that are still coming. So we'll have to incorporate considerations, for example, around food waste rollout that we're expecting to come forward. But we have tried to incorporate that into the Leicestershire's joint waste management strategy with the districts, which was adopted in 2022. So that does incorporate all of our thinking in terms of what we anticipate coming forward. And the last point I'd just add from a background context is how we manage the service in order to fulfil our statutory duties as a waste disposal authority. So we treat or dispose of around about 170,000 tonnes of residual waste. The budget for that is just over £21 million a year, and that's excluding our haulage costs. That's just the costs of paying those contracts that we merchant with the market. And that is across a number of providers. And those contracts have varying end dates, but we do have an optional break clause in all of those contracts in the period being 2028 and 2031, should we want to trigger those break clauses. And that's important because it allows us as a service to review our approach and ensure that it's fit for purpose in that really changing landscape that I've just mentioned. If I then just touch on and move on to the options appraisal work itself, the service commissioned consultants in the summer of 2022 to try and identify the most cost-effective and resilient long-term strategy for managing our residual waste. And a synopsis of their final report is appended to this report. And we've asked officers to produce that synopsis in order that committee had a little bit more of an enhanced detail from what would have otherwise, I'm afraid, been a commercially sensitive report, because that document looked at existing contractual information and a number of cost models. Well, hopefully that's added some detail to the report. The scrutiny covering report does set out the process that officers went through. So it does briefly explain things like what we mean by merchanting, entering into those contracts, mixed residual waste. So to colleagues, they may well think of that as black bag waste, the stuff that you put out at the curtilage, and bulky waste, which tend to be those bigger items that won't fit in your bin that we find coming through the recycling household waste sites. And from point 12 in the report, it does set out the options that were appraised, and we went from over 50 down to a short list that were done in more detail of 9. And they ranged from continuing with the current merchanting arrangements all the way through to developing the council's own energy from waste facility with optional pre-treatment added on. So building a piece of infrastructure. And the report sets out the criteria by which they were assessed. We considered cost, and we modelled that over a 20-year period. We did some high-level carbon modelling. We looked at deliverability. Would we be able to build a piece of infrastructure in the timescales that we need, and the resilience, both in terms of operational and cost. And just quickly, Chair, I think it's worth highlighting the timing of this piece of work. It is referenced in the report, but now is arguably the last opportunity where the service could seek political direction, where all options are still feasible and on the table. That includes those build options right the way through to any lead times where we would have to serve contractual notice. That then brings me to the consultant's recommendations and the conclusions in the report. So considering all of those earlier factors and some wider risks in the wider waste industry and industry in general around things like future energy pricing, the confidence and its volatility, we've had that in recent years, and the potential impacts of the emissions trading scheme, they have a real impact on the build option around energy from waste. You know, that volatility in the market, making it, is it profitable or is it actually more expensive than merchanting? We had to consider those considerations. But the recommendation was that the County Council progress a low investment approach, either by continuing with the existing contracts that we have or via remerchanting, so retendering those, reprocuring them from 2031 onwards. And those form the conclusions in the report. Just on the partnering considerations, there was no real strong evidence specifically that warranted recommending that we pursue it actively, but we would be proposing to recommend to Cabinet that we remain open to that opportunity if something comes along that is worth us pursuing. And maybe my last point is that if, and when we go to Cabinet, if they approve the recommendations, the next steps in terms of any future sort of reprocurement exercises, they would form part of the business as usual work of the service. But we would build in some gateway reviews where it's sensible, because we're in such a tumultuous stage with emerging legislation. So we would continue to review our approach going forward. And with that, Chair, I'll pause. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Mr. Payne, as lead member, do you have anything to add?
Only to put on record my thanks to Jo and her team. We're all aware of our budgetary constraints over the last 10 years or so, in particular over the last 4 or 5 years, they've got particularly challenging. And whilst everyone will be aware we have 14 waste and recycling sites, or we did have 14, a couple of recently have been taken out of commission, or the hours have changed, but it's Vicky's team within the department that has to deal with not only the legislative changes coming down from Parliament through the Environment Act, but also make our cloth fit our resource envelope here at Leicestershire County Council, and the team do that with less and less resources because we try and prioritise the resources on the front line, and where we do have waste sites that are open, etc., they need to be staffed. And you know, when the department's asked to make savings, often it's this policy section of the department that gets squeezed on that. So they do a great job in assessing very, very serious commercial decision making, policy making documents and bringing them to the scrutiny bodies and the cabinet, and informing the council as to what options we have in terms of waste disposal moving forward. So thanks to them for the work they've done. In terms of the proposals within the report, I support them wholeheartedly. As you know, we do have budgetary constraints and challenges. We're not really in a position to spend hundreds of millions of pounds commissioning our own energy for waste facilities or the treatment centres, etc. And frankly, the department and the council have done a fantastic job in managing our budgets and disposing of Leicestershire's waste on a technology neutral basis for many, many years. And I fully support their considerations and what they're proposing to take forward. More of the same as far as I can see. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, I now throw it open to members for their points. Mr. Hunt indicated first, then Mrs. Page, and then Mr. Bolter. Thank you.
First of all,
yes,
Chair,
please.
just like to thank you for your remarks on the last item. I thought they were very powerful, and I'm very pleased to have heard you. I think it's a good project. I think the only thing that concerns me slightly is the procurement process, that you're setting out the directions you want to go into and in a timely way, and that's great. But when it comes down to the procurement, there's considerations like which companies are allowed to, are qualified, if you like, to bid, and how much attention is going to be given to the stuff in the Environment Act, looking at paragraph 6 and 7. Transition to a more circular economy, that's a big ask. And those sort of things can get lost when it comes to the procurement stage, let alone air quality, which is also going to be part of this. But otherwise, I think we should welcome it.
Indeed. Did you want to wait till you had one or two other comments before you respond?
Well, Chair, I mean, I think just to acknowledge the point Councillor Hunt's making, it is going to be a challenge. I think the example being, for example, carbon. We've done some of those modelled carbon assessments on all of the options that we looked at in getting to the recommendation to Cabinet, but it doesn't negate the fact that all of the activities that the council does and in managing waste, it doesn't mean that we don't have a carbon impact. It just means that we need to understand that impact, and we did commit to carbon being an important element when we produced the joint strategy with our district colleagues. It's almost a similar point to earlier. We have to identify that strategic set of ambitions, but realising them is still going to be challenging relative to what things cost. The fortuitous thing with this piece of work was that actually from a modelled scenario, there weren't huge swings in terms of those carbon models. But yes, I acknowledge it will be challenging for the service.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Mrs. Page, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for your report. I also think, and I have to echo, that it is a very good report, and that the team has really managed over the years to work with the budgetary restraints. And I know it's a challenge past, and I'm sure it will be coming forward. However, as we're always saying, we don't know what the future's changes will be, and we don't know whether the long-term strategy will still be cost effective. But what really worries me, it is that we are talking about that the council adopts a low investment merchanting approach. And the problem is with the low investment. Now, whilst I appreciate that, you know, we have to manage a budget going forward. And when you're looking at 21 million in comparison to, say, send transport or adult social care, it's a very minor budget. But waste affects every single residence in, you know, Leicestershire. And when you go out there, people constantly will say, well, what do I get for my council tax money other than my bin's empty? And now the tips are closed. Now, my division is Lutterworth and I'm not affected, but people are writing to me from Kipworth and Harborough because they're affected. And people are really, really keen that our waste services will be maintained to a high standard. And people are afraid going forward that we are, whenever changes come, that we're cutting back more and more. And whilst I'm sitting here and I endorse your report and I see that our we're somewhat limited, I wonder it is how can we assure that we will maintain a very good service going forward to all of our residents without constantly cutting back? Or maybe is it time that our lead member, maybe because we're in a budget period again, puts forward for more resources into that service to maintain a service that is important to every single household? And when we are talking air pollution, when we are talking environment and restraining the environment, the collection of waste, recycling, it is a great part of that green agenda, and we should ensure that that is managed to a high standard and will be available. And I know that's a lot of waffle, but thank you very much.
Don't worry, we're well used to those interventions and we thank you for them. Right, indeed. Right, Mr. Bolter, please, next. And then, did you want an early intervention?
Yeah, I'll try and answer. There's a question.
Mr. Bolter, would you mind? The lead members, it's urgent.
Yeah, Mrs. Page asked a question of the lead member. Is it time that the lead member asked for more resources within the budget setting round? I think was the essence. What I just want to be clear about, this report isn't about our waste and recycling centres. You know, and yes, they are subject to budget decisions come budget time. This report focuses on what we do and how we dispose of Leicestershire's waste. It's not really the front-facing operations of the department. But in some respects, these are the more costly services that we provide that the public probably don't see, but nonetheless are essential to the health and well-being of Leicestershire. And when I mention about low investment, or the report mentions about a low investment approach, in my preamble I mentioned that we're not in a position to leverage hundreds of millions of pounds to build our own disposal or waste facilities or energy for waste facilities. In fact, I think a couple of $100 million is probably a low estimate of what the cost would be. Maybe the director would give you a true evaluation of what that cost would truly be. But the low investment is really, we're not in a position to put hundreds of millions of pounds worth of Leicestershire's money or borrowed money up front to build a facility. So we'll carry on doing much of the same. That's what the essence of the report says. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. I think as a committee we'd endorse and understand that. We know where we are on funding and our role in budgets going forward. We don't really, I don't think it's appropriate for us debating that. We've got a project in front of us, a report, and it's looking as we move forward, and we're not dealing with, as you suggested. So I then move forward with that in mind to ask Mr. Bolter, sir.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I understand the report. However, we are stuck at the moment because we've got a new government We don't know whether they're going to keep to the old government's systems and commitments, or whether they're going to change it, or whether they're going to make it more pointed, do things quicker. We don't know. For that reason, as Blake said, we haven't got the money to throw around doing things that in our ideal world we'd perhaps like to do ourselves. We just can't afford it. There's not the money there to do it. So basically we're stuck with doing what we are at the moment. I don't think there's any alternative than that. So that's option F, I believe, in the chart. But if the new government does start changing things, are we flexible enough to actually do something about it? That's the problem, because, you know, hopefully they'll give us a commitment for X number of years, so we've got something to build on. If they change the rules halfway through, we're left stranded in the middle of nowhere. And as for the increase in recycling, that depends on what we're allowed to collect and deposit at our recycling centre. It was changed some years ago, and our collection weights went down because we collect lighter materials. If we're taking glass out of our system, have to reduce the amount of recycling because the weight will go down, because glass is one of the heaviest things we put in the recycling. So I just wondered how that's taken into account with all the figures.
Chair, I'll do the first one, if I may, Councillor Walter. So in terms of how much or how little of what is a raft of changes that we anticipate coming legislatively wise, and whether the proposal to merchant with the market and various providers will be flexible enough. The short answer is it's the most flexible means by which we can protect the interests of the council. We will not enter into any future contracts, and the existing contracts that we have, without going into too much sensitive information, are such that we have a really clear buffer to allow to not get in the way of as much recycling or composting as the county council and its residents can achieve. The contracts are designed in such a way that there aren't minimum tonnages that would mean that at any point we would have to feed those contracts residual waste. And in the background detail, in the modelling, I said that we have 170,000 tonnes. We've modelled 105, and I won't go into the detail, but when we look at all the raft of legislative change, we've took a risk-based approach to how much, almost what percentage of those things will come into effect, will be adopted. And it gives us a really big range within which to just ensure that when we go to the market and we take out new contracts, we don't overinflate what we need to commit to those contracts. So I believe that from a service perspective, we've built in the right levels of flexibility to protect the interests of the council so that we will not have to feed any contracts with that black bag waste. The other point, just on the recycling, whether it be through the recycling house or waste sites or the district's curbside collection schemes, and we know that there is still lots of change coming with those as well. I think it's just, I've mentioned it at previous committees, but it's just to give maybe a flavour of also how complex that is. The strategy that Leicestershire has with the county and the district doesn't actually commit us. I don't think it models that we will achieve the national target for recycling of 65%. But that's because it's a national target, and it doesn't just include household waste, it includes trade waste. So I would be over speculating, but there have been reports that suggest that the trade waste that falls into that category, the municipal waste, it's designed in such a way that 80% of that could probably be recycled. It's a much cleaner waste stream than what we get through the black bin or through the residents' curbside collecting. So what you'll have, and there'll be other parts of the country that will achieve higher than 65. We absolutely have high ambitions in Leicestershire, but that target isn't a Leicestershire target, it's a national target. So our strategy is teed up to support achieving that, and these contracts will in no way prohibit our ability to optimise our performance.
Thank you. That was. Are you happy with that?
Yeah, you know, I'm never happy.
Well, all right. Well, just sit back and relax and enjoy yourself. Well done. Right. Anybody else would wish to comment on this? No? No? Okay. Well, all I can say is to thank you for your report. I thought it was an excellent report, and particularly the strategic policy of how you've looked at commitments on contracting is really brilliant, because that empowers this authority now by switching that. And I think I look forward to it with excitement, because I think we will eventually, hopefully, be able to repurpose some of the stuff that we do as a process to be able to go on and to introduce it to other partners or merchants to be able to take forward, that it could actually end up as an income line instead of filling big holes or burning stuff. We might be able to do something with it real and have an advantage. But I'd like to thank the officers. That was a good debate. There is always confusion with these debates, and really I always like to look at the purpose of the report. So I just glanced down and checked the purpose of the report, and hopefully we've complied by that. So I'd like to thank you for your participation this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you members for your comments. So we now move on to item number 10, is the biodiversity duty plan. This is on pages 41 to 74 on your agenda pack. Anne Carruthers, Director of Environment and Transport, will present the report. And over to you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And we're seeking committee's comments on the biodiversity duty plan, which is appended to your report prior to it going to Cabinet in December. Under legislation, public authorities have a duty to conserve biodiversity. This duty was strengthened under the Environment Act 2021, and that has moved it from being conserving, so rather than just conserving biodiversity, we now also have a duty to enhance biodiversity. The national targets for biodiversity are set out in paragraph 7 of the report for you, and they include, as you'll see there, things like by 2030, so not an awful lot of time, but by 2030, halting the decline in species abundance and also protecting 30% of UK land. So quite significant targets there. We need to show that we are taking action towards and contributing towards. In summary, the requirements on us are threefold. The first one is we need to consider what we can do to conserve and enhance biodiversity. The second one is we need to agree policies and objectives that will take us there and support that. And the third one is then to act on delivering those. We have an existing Action for Nature document, and we've reviewed that in light of these requirements, and our assessment is that actually that meets that first requirement for us for considering what we can do to conserve and enhance biodiversity. We then undertook a review of all our existing plans and strategies across the council, and you'll understand it won't just be plans and strategy within the Environment and Transport Department. There's other parts of the council who contribute towards this, such as you'll hear soon from our colleagues about the tree strategy and corporate resources. So we undertook a review of the existing plans and strategies around that second requirement we're required to do. And the outcome of that has been that we have got a strong foundation that supports us in fulfilling this new strengthened duty under biodiversity. The key findings of the review of our position have been that the majority of our policies and strategies contribute to help meet that duty. However, when they're next reviewed, they will need to specifically refer to the duty to show that actually the actions in there, we've considered it, and this will be part of the approach in helping us meet that requirement. The environment strategy itself, you'll be aware of the Council's environment strategy, that is a solid foundation and there's significant activity happening underneath that. And that already raises awareness of conservation enhancement on its own. And also then our own LCC site management plans, because, we are a landowner in our own right. They are there and they take account of biodiversity requirements. We're also required to report on biodiversity net gain. Now, just as a reminder, this is the net gain and enhancing biodiversity through the planning process. We're also required to report on that. And that will be included in a future iteration of the biodiversity duty plan, because we're still waiting on the guidance that will tell us how they expect us to report on this. Again, I'll just give you a reminder, as a county council, our reporting duties are in relation to our planning responsibilities, which is for minerals and waste. So, you know, not all the planning arena there, but for the minerals and waste aspect of it. And as I say, that will come in future when we get that guidance. We're required to provide a separate biodiversity report on a 5-yearly basis, which obviously we will do. And, you know, I'm sure it won't be unexpected, but unfortunately, there's no new funding to cover this duty. We're going to have to absorb it under existing, you know, resources, both staff resources, etc., existing resources and activities. Welcome comments on it. I'll just say I've got my colleague here, James O'Brien, who's our environment team manager. He's a real expert when it comes to biodiversity and our duty. So he's here to assist if you have any comments and queries. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Anne. Right, Mr. Payne as lead member, do you have anything to add?
Just one or two things. The first one is, again, this is an example where the Environment Act 2021 has placed enormous activity for upper tier authorities, well, for all authorities, but particularly county councils and upper tier authorities, and this is another example of that. I actually welcome the strengthening of the biodiversity. This is very different to the biodiversity net gain, which planning authorities will be very familiar with. This is a duty on public authorities to go beyond just conserving biodiversity, but strengthen it. And I welcome that. I think we have a responsibility to make sure that our biodiversity and our environment is left in a better state than we found it when we were placed upon this earth. So anything we can do on that journey should be welcomed, in my view. But apart from that, I think the technicalities of the report are being covered by the director, and I'll leave it to your committee to debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Anybody got any comments? Yes, Mr. Bolter, please.
Thank you. I know it's an old chestnut of mine, but we want to maintain the species we've got at the moment, not lose any. And we mentioned before, we've got the swifts, we mentioned hedgehogs and other things that don't seem to be protected, particularly at the moment. I know County Council had a project about swift boxes a little while ago, which I think was quite successful. But things like that, not a vast amount of money, because we haven't got it, but a small amount of money makes a big difference to local wildlife. And I wondered whether we can do something the same that we store for hedgehogs, which are on very steep decline. A lot of this down to district levels, but you know, if we've got to build all these houses the government says we've got to build, and take land to do it, and are we sure we can balance that policy with increasing the number of houses and actually this policy we've got here, you know, protect 30% of UK land? The two policies don't seem to be aligned. Unless you, of course, you build on all of the south of England and leave the north of England as a protected land. So I thought it should be a balance throughout the whole country about that target, and not sort of spread it through the whole of Great Britain. So I'll just wait for the comments about the halting decline of species abundance from officers, particularly butterfly decrease as well, because that's going down as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bolter. I would just say, I think, and it's only dragging the brain cell, I think it was 92,000 square miles. So I'm not sure the whole of the UK, the mainland. So I'm not quite sure whether you think we're going to build on a third of that or what. I don't know. But it's an interesting quote. Okay, but it's there. Thank you. Mrs. Page, please.
Thank you. Like the report, love the way it's set out in the little bits, and I like the little bits of the actions underneath it. And as just been said, anything to welcome strengthening is most welcome, but I'm a little bit concerned. And so it says, as part of the next review, say for resources, it's to include the reference in the reports, and it says that all the way through. And I was wondering, because when things like this go out in the general public, it was the same with the flooding policy, that everybody out there believed that it was the county council who had the magic wand to do everything about flooding and make it go away. So the perception here could, in my opinion, raise expectations we can't meet, because you yourself said there is no new funding. So I was wondering whether in future it might be worth to set out what it is we can or we cannot do as part of these reports, just in order so that expectation level isn't, and that bar isn't raised so high that people keep coming back to us saying, what did you do about it? And just welcome a comment, but thank you.
Thank you, Miss Page. And I apologise, I went on to a little bit of fantasy thoughts about the area of the mapping of the land, and I admitted not to invite you to comment on what you'd heard.
Thank you, Chair. And if it's all right, if I maybe have a shot, and then James might want to come in with a bit more detail. And if it's all right, if I go back to Mr. Bolter first and then Mrs. Page. On that 30% land, and how do we protect it? That will be a key challenge for the local plans. It is the local plans that dictate our spatial, how this country will change over time spatially, across the and they have to take cognizance to all these policies. So that is an environmental duty. It's set there in legislation. They have to take cognizance of that as they're developing their local plans. And as you know, then through each individual planning site, you've got that biodiversity net gain requirement, etc. Not saying that's the answer to everything by any means, but these are mechanisms that are in use there. In terms of, you just picked up a couple of points about, the swifts and the work we've done to support those, and then you asked whether we could do that for hedgehogs or other species. And we would just emphasise on that one, we did get grant funding that has enabled us to do that. But I would reassure members, wherever there's an opportunity that we can apply for external funding, because we don't unfortunately have our own, we can put into that, we will certainly do that. But then it comes into the principle, and I think it was this same principle applies exactly to Mrs. Page's comment there about there's only so much we can do as a county council. We don't have a magic wand. We don't have all the control. We don't have all the money. We certainly can't sort flooding, and we certainly aren't up for it and can't sort the whole of the biodiversity and environment agenda either. What we can say is what we can do within our own remits, and obviously then work within partnerships to support other organisations, other business, communities to do what they can do. So often our work is about signposting, raising awareness, supporting, because those agendas are all about others doing their bit as well. We have to be clear what we're doing for ourselves, and we have got that Action for Nature document, and our colleagues in Corporate Resources, I'm looking over there, have plans about how they're managing their land within their holdings, etc. So absolutely, we have to do what we can within our own remit, but also it's supporting the wider, Leicestershire to do their bit as well. I'm sure James might have a bit more detail, however.
Yes, yeah, just to build on what Anna said, I think it's important not to look at the biodiversity duty plan in isolation. It's one of a suite of mechanisms that the government have introduced as part of the aforementioned Environment Act 2021, all designed to work together and they're all connected in order to drive that agenda to improve the environment, not just in terms of nature, but also in terms of water quality, air quality that was mentioned earlier, climate change, and also waste as well. So all of these components interact with one another. So we've also got the local nature recovery strategy, which will be coming to the committee in January. And that's the overall landscape scale strategy that's going to map how we're going to improve, protect, enhance nature and biodiversity across the county, city and Rutland. And what the biodiversity duty plan does is provide a mechanism for how public bodies, and in this case us as the local authority, can contribute to the meeting of those overarching environmental objectives and targets and so on. And alongside that is the aforementioned biodiversity net gain. And that's where, in theory, you have this balance. How can we have housing but also have nature and protect nature as well? So the trick will be to see how that happens in reality and whether that balance will be achieved and constantly reviewed as we go along. So as I say, these components need to be looked at as a whole, not in isolation. Thank you.
If I may come back, I appreciate that, but I think we need to be clearer in setting that out so there was no perception and misunderstanding with the general public as we go forward, because I've been around for a long time and I've seen that if we are putting a policy and if we don't say from the word go that we cannot deliver and we don't have that magic wand, that expectation starts to grow higher and higher. And then if we have to backpedal, thank you.
Thank you for that. Yes, I'll take just a quick response. It could be in aid of what you were.
Very quickly. Yeah, I think that's an excellent suggestion, actually. I think we could make reference to the fact of where the biodiversity duty plan fits into the bigger picture and make that connection. So it's very obvious. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Mr. Payne, you indicated you wish to speak, or was you just stretching your arm?
No, I just in response, it is a good point, because we're not we can't solve every problem, and sometimes I think there is a feeling that the county council are responsible and should solve many of the problems out in Leicestershire. We're just one organisation, we're a stakeholder amongst many, and I think the biodiversity duty and the ambition is clearly set in law, certainly, that the government aspires to the targets that have been mentioned already, which is to halt the declining species abundance by 2030 and protect 30% of UK land. Just on UK land, I think sometimes we have a tendency to believe that more land's actually developed in the UK than it actually is. And I think just from memory, less than 10% of all land is actually developed in the country, which from an ecosystem perspective, I think is less than 1%. I don't know, I'm not an expert in this, but I seem to recall some of that data previously. But nonetheless, I think one of the challenges the council's going to have, and it's identified in paragraph 16, is that we'll need to report the biodiversity net gain, but the government is yet to provide secondary guidance or regulation that stipulates exactly what information should be captured and reported. So, we're fully aware of our responsibilities and duties as a public authority. We've put the systems in place to discharge those duties, but we're still in need of further guidance and regulation from the current government in terms of how we report, what we report, and that's the limbo the County Council finds themselves in. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Payne. I think that was quite a good intervention. Thank you for that. Mr. Chapman, please.
Thank you, Chair. Right, this is a bit of a strange question around all of this. So if we're going somewhere, we plant a load of trees, if we're looking about species and everything else, how often do we go back? So we take an acre and put 100 trees in there. How often do you go back to see what species are starting to inhabit that as trees start to grow and everything comes on? How often do we actually go back and see what we're actually producing with what we're doing there? Because obviously, if that tree grows bigger, that's against our net gain, in a sense. And how do we record that, monitor that, and follow that forward in years to come?
Yes, please. James?
Yeah, so back to monitoring and measuring, yes. If I'm honest, I don't think we do enough of that, and that's a lot of that is down to resources. We don't have the resources to do it. However, that very point is picked up in the aforementioned local nature recovery strategy. So as part of that strategy, we identified the need to improve the monitoring and reporting on species, on habitats, on the state of nature in the area. And we will be looking at how that could be resourced going forward, subject to getting further government funding in this space. As part of the local nature recovery strategy, we've also created 100 what we're calling indicator species. So these are species that people would relatively easily recognize and identify within the landscape. And the intention is we've picked species that if you see them, and see them in sufficient numbers, it's a good sign that that habitat is in good condition. So we're hoping to go forward with using some citizen science as well to help us inform the quality of habitat and see that change. But it is an area that we need to do more work on, but it is very resource heavy in terms of money and staff to do that counting. And we will build also on the good work of our county recorders. There are volunteers out there who do thousands of hours of work every year counting the species for us, and we will use their information and expertise where we can.
Thank you very much for that response, James. Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you. I was just going to come back with that, and then you mentioned the word volunteers, because it's something that probably you could push and to monitor new areas of growth. I know there's a lot of volunteers, but you do need an awful lot, and then it's the insurance, isn't it, of those volunteers going onto that land. I suppose it's opening up another can of worms, isn't it? So, but you are looking at that way, so thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. Page.
Just a question to James, please. Is there a possibility to put like a flow chart along this? How I'm just trying to get it right in my mind's eye, where how the biodiversity sits and how its spider webs interacts with all of the other things. So, you know, so if I am Joe Soap, I open it up and I can see it, you know, rather than reading 20 pages. Just a comment.
Again, yes, I think that's another excellent suggestion. I've got an existing simple example of the flow chart, but it is a very simplistic flow chart. To fully display it will be a very complex flow chart. But yes, I think we can add a flow chart or a diagram in the document that shows where it connects, how that connects. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you. And I'd like to thank James and Anne for their contributions in that. We now move on to our final item of the day, Tree Management Strategy and Annual Update. This is on pages 75 to 80 agenda pack. Steve Grant, Head of Operations Property Services, and Adam Goodall, Principal Tree and Woodland Manager, joins us this afternoon, and welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chair. Okay for me to start?
Indeed, over to you, Steve. Thank you.
Sure. The annual report is to give an overview of our progress against the existing tree management strategy. That was agreed in March 2020 and is due for review next year in 2025. So I think listening to the discussions on biodiversity, I think there's an opportunity there to weave in how we fit into the puzzles. I think that's quite a helpful debate then about biodiversity. We don't have a magic wand, but we have been successfully in securing a number of grant funding opportunities for ourselves and for partners, so districts, parish councils, and Adam will give a bit more detail on that. The report covers business as usual, which is tree inspections and managing our tree assets throughout the year. And it's pleasing to report that we're ahead of our sort of planned schedule on that this year. There's also an update on ash dieback, where the county is current status and our response to ash dieback. There's also a number of initiatives covered, so tree nursery that's been established in partnership with the National Forest, and a number of other initiatives throughout the report, working with our partners at other sites. So and hand over to Adam, that's going to go into more detail.
Thank you very much.
Happy to take questions after.
Yes, welcome, Adam. We await your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, everyone. So the tree management strategy obviously established a clear vision for the county council to ensure that we manage our tree and woodlands correctly, but it also has sort of wider aspirations in terms of trees and woodlands across the county in general. Obviously, this is a sort of annual update on where we are, and I brought an update last year to you. So, you know, as a body, as a landowner, we manage an estimated 300,000 trees across our estate, and that's split approximately over 400 hectares of woodland across farms, across our country parks, And also, 37% of trees are on country parks, 35% of our trees are on our highways, and roughly sort of 10% on schools and 6% on other properties. So we've got a very large volume of trees which we're responsible for. And my sort of role, the role of my team is to manage those trees in the best possible way, to proactively manage them for biodiversity, for the wide resource, the wide benefit they bring to our residents, and also in respect of our sort of duties under the Health and Safety at Work Act. So one of our sort of key aspects is inspections across our sites, and we do that for a number of our sort of different departments. We work across departments, and a key aspect of that is management of the highway tree stock, which we do on a cyclic basis. Again, approximately 100,000 trees on the highway, recorded on our asset database, just under 50,000 individual records, tree groups and trees. We also receive a high volume of inquiries each year. So this year, so far, we've received 1,059 inquiries relating to tree matters, which we deal with promptly, and we have a link through to highways to deal with that effectively and record it against our tree record. So we've got a way of monitoring that going onwards. Since 2001, we set a target to plant 700,000 trees across the county. We were very realistically recognised we can't do that alone. We had to form a partnership, work very closely with a number of other organisations, and we're glad to sort of say to date we're now over 430,000 trees recorded on that tree database. So that's our own work, that's our own trees, but more importantly, that's trees of our partners and trees that we've provided through our various free tree schemes. And in order to support that, we've made various applications, mainly to the Forest Commission, who are the main government body for supporting tree planting. And we've just received notification unofficially, but in writing, that we will receive an additional £400,000 this year for tree planting, and that'll also provide additional funding for establishment of trees over the next 3 or 4 years. So that'll fund a major point of tree planting, but also some new tiny forests, as they're called, in public parks in Loughborough, Mount Sorrel, Melton, and 2 schemes which will support in Harborough, working with those district councils there. And again, we continue to lead on tree planting projects through our Ash Dieback Board, our free tree scheme, and pushing towards our partnership with the Woodland Trust, who supply and plant many trees across the county on our behalf. And that's a very strong partnership which we took over from the Environment Department in the last few years. We continue to sort of work on orchards, which is a key sort of interest from members. And again, we were successfully awarded £30,000 from DEFRA to push orchards and to promote orchards, ensure they're managed appropriately, and to create new orchards. And we planted 30 new orchards last year, and we're hoping to do something similar this year. And again, we're looking at our own estate, our own county farms, for how we can benefit those sites, how we can increase tree planting on those sites. Sometimes merely enhancing hedgerows that are already there, planting within the hedgerows to ensure those farm sites can still be managed appropriately, but also on marginal land where tree planting might be possible. We have 2 potential schemes which we're hoping to take forward next year, again with additional funding from the Forest Commission. And again, the tree nursery has been developed, and we're hoping to start developing and producing our own trees this coming winter, ready for planting out in the next 2 years. And that'll be a cyclic process, gradually growing that site and using it to leapfrog many of our tree planting schemes. In terms of Ash Dieback, that continues to be monitored by my group, and we are seeing infection of trees slowing down, but we are still seeing approximately 6% of the trees in the landscape infected to some degree, some of which they appear to be recovering, some trees which are declining and do need management. And in terms of that, we have now appointed a dedicated Ash Dieback contractor to manage trees on our highway network, and they are sort of able to undertake large-scale works concentrating on the road hierarchy, so the more busy routes first. And currently we're on the A511 near Colville, going in there and removing infected ash. But while we're there and we have the road closures, we're also going in and undertaking proactive management of our tree stock. So plantations that need thinning, and of course we will be going back and replanting to make sure that we are not losing and there's no net loss, certainly within our highway corridors. And again, we have a protocol for dealing with ash within private ownership. We have a duty under the Highway Act to obviously maintain safe routes along the highway, and again liaising with private landowners, private owners of trees to make sure that they are maintained in a safe condition, preferably taking a soft route first, which is to try and encourage them gently to undertake works where it's deemed necessary. So that's a quick sort of highlight of what we've been up to this year. And of course, looking forwards, the tree management strategy needs to be updated. It needs to be brought up to date, certainly in terms of new legislation, new policy changes, but also to reflect where we want to be taking our tree stock in the future and looking at opportunities, but also looking at the best management. So what I'll be looking to do is bring a draft of that strategy to this meeting next year for comment and for approval.
Thank you for that, Adam. Mr. Payne, do you wish to comment?
I do, Chairman. Firstly, you will note at the bottom of the report, it is a report of the Director of Corporate Resources, and Adam, as a part of that team, brings this report to us today. And as ever, Adam and his team do a fantastic job across Leicestershire in not only delivering the ambition for 700,000 trees, but obviously preserving and conserving the existing tree stock across Leicestershire. I just want to say 2 or 3 things. This report, in some respects, is as new to me as it is to members of this committee. So I'm delighted to obviously hear that we've reached about 432,000 trees. And I'm particularly delighted to hear that we've been awarded another £400,000 to deliver so many trees. And I actually think, and when we set this target, I didn't think by one electoral term, obviously we're going into the county elections next year, that would deliver 700,000 trees, especially the council prior to setting this target were delivering less than 20,000 trees a year. So I think this is a real success story for this council. And I actually think with that extra funding that's just been announced, we might be close to achieving this target way before I ever thought we could. So that pleases me immensely. The other thing I want to mention is my inbox over the last few months tends to get inundated with requests for the free tree packs, and we've given out so many trees in partnership with the Willand Trust, of course, but again, that's a real success story, and I think it's very much valued, especially amongst landowners of Leicestershire that look to the county council to support them in their tree planting endeavours. So you know, hats off to the council for making this happen. We set a target, we set an ambition. We're not there, but I do think we're going to reach that target sooner than I could have ever imagined. And I thank Adam and the whole council for making that happen in advance. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Payne, for that good news contribution. Thank you. Yes, please, Mrs. Page.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, and you answered most of my questions, but there's still plenty I got to ask. But Councillor Payne, I'm afraid as it was you who set the idea 1 tree for every resident, I think we'll have to up the number now because we've got more residents in. But and whilst you haven't heard about the 400,000, I think that should be an opportunity for us to get in touch with Katie Peck and really shout that and what we have done for maybe our next newsletter or even in briefings. Now, whilst I've said that, you did answer the county council farms for me in general, but question number 1, are we insisting, because for instance if we have a dairy farm, they may say, well, we're a dairy farm or we don't want to waste any. Are we insisting, because after all it's our land, and so are we insisting that all our county owned farms are taking part in the scheme? That's question number 1. Question number 2, it's really, really sad that when you're driving around that we have this ash dieback, but sometimes I look around because everybody loves a tree, and me in particular, but I'm mindful that there might be other diseases that are killing other species. So while we have got all of these projects, are we just focusing at ash, or are we also looking at different trees? So I think that's really, really important that we should look wider. That's question number 2. Now, there was a question, have we got the budget going forward? Obviously, we do have the budget going forward now. And my last point then is, as part of, well, this county council, because I'm reading here, Market Botworth and Braunston and Leicester Forest East. Well, parochial, I'm over from Lutterworth, and we have the wonderful Mr. Tim Marshes over there and whatever else. Could we be looking there and part of Lutterworth East development to get some trees out there? And my very last question is, if we're planting 700,000 trees, and if we're going up on that number, do we have a budget going forward to maintain all of these trees on public land? Because there's one more. Because going on in 20 years, because I have it now where residents are saying the branches are knocking on my roof and whatever, and then somebody says, well, we haven't got the resources to cut the branches back. So is there the budget? And last but not least, I forgot now, I come back and that's enough. Thank you.
Adam, I'm not sure it's 5, 6 or 7. Over to you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So in terms of farms, we're not insisting, we're not holding a stick up to them. We are targeting those farms that we want to work with first. It's probably a wider conversation with our strategic sort of property officers in the way they approach farms and environmental stewardship and perhaps other sort of beneficial ways of managing the land. But certainly we have a number of farms that have been identified where tree planting would be beneficial. It would enhance other features on the farm. It would link into other woodlands, other sort of areas of importance, like Mr. Marshes. So that's the approach we're taking at the moment, and we're getting a good response from those farmers that we're speaking to. Certainly, you know, in terms of works that will benefit their farming business anyway. So, you know, looking at interrupting sort of flood runoff from fields, that sort of thing. So it's beneficial work with them. So yeah, that's quite an interesting one. But certainly, you know, there's lots more we can do. It's about resources, about how much time myself and the staff can put into that. But certainly there's a wealth of knowledge and lots of things we could be doing there. In terms of ash dieback, yes, as we do a summer survey, we drive specific routes to monitor the progress of ash dieback and look at surveying of our own trees and those of private landowners. We are always on the lookout for other potential diseases that we need to be aware of and other trends that are going on, certainly with changes in the climate. Sycamore is being more impacted by something called sooty bark disease, which can kill it in 2 or 3 years. There are other issues that we are on the lookout for, tree and pest diseases that we know are in Europe and that may in the future impact upon us. And so keeping a sharp eye out for that. Ash dieback was actually first spotted in Leicestershire almost 15 years ago by one of my colleagues. So, you know, we are on the lookout for those issues. Mr. Marshes, yeah, absolutely important site. Obviously, we have a large amount of farmland in that area. There's the potential development going on there, which hopefully will create a huge amount of green open space and tree planting as part of that proposal, certainly based on the master plan. One of the sites I'm looking for a new woodland is on that patch as well, over the road on the M1. So I'll be in touch when we've got something we can talk about. Oh, what was the other one?
The money. Have you got enough money?
Yeah, so the forest cushion grant is so large because more than half of it is for maintenance. It's about establishing trees in the long term. The other sort of thing we're very careful about is the right tree in the right place, the right species in the right place, something that maybe hasn't happened in past times. We've inherited trees that perhaps weren't the right species at the time, or budgets were different. Budgets were, we were able to maintain pruning levels that we can't do now. But also we work with a range of partners, that we're not just planting on our own land, we are helping other district councils plant on their own sites as well. So we are mindful of budget constraints.
I just remembered my last question,
no.
if I may. When we are growing these small plants, but the trees which are dying back are huge trees. So how do we compensate? Because it changes the landscape if you have a big and also are you working together with the biodiversity, because trees are soaking up the water and helping with the flooding? And then I'm finished. Thank you.
No, agree on all of that, and absolutely. part of the reason why we are so concerned about ash dieback is because it's, after we lost all the elms, ash is now one of our major components, certainly within large parts of the county, and we can't replace those quick enough. That's the real risk, and it is that there will be a change in the landscape until these new trees develop and grow, and potentially we will lose biodiversity because of that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Adam. I think you got about 6-7 boundaries there, so we'll try and look a bit further. Right, Mr. Bolter.
Thanks, yeah, yes. Always interesting subject, trees, much close to my heart. I suppose you call me a tree hugger. But yes, you're right. We've lost the elms. Now we've got ash, chestnut, sycamore you mentioned. Lost a lot of beeches a few years ago because of the dry summers. Shallow rooted, no water, so the beeches die. So is it time to look at some other species other than our natural species from other parts of the world to combat the climate change that we're now experiencing? I know you can get some resistant plants from elsewhere, which are supposed to be resistant. I personally have not found them resistant yet because the centres have come to it over a few years. But are we looking worldwide to see what we can actually put there?
Yeah, absolutely. We already plant a range of species, a range of cultivars, a range of trees from different climates, from different parts of the world. In our urban areas, we're selecting trees for a range of benefits. Sometimes it's colour, sometimes it's fruit, sometimes it's flood alleviation benefits. But it gets more tricky as we move into the countryside, as we move into our rural environment, where we also want to reflect our natural environment. So it's but it is also looking at perhaps provenance of trees. So if the climate's going to change, our native oak that's grown and established in this part of Leicestershire is going to struggle, do we start looking at more southerly provenances? But it's a debate that is often had and is still raging on between ecologists, between foresters, between botanists. It's you can't crack it all with one nut. So I think it's about mosaics, and it's about looking at diversity of species and diversity of provenance, and really trying to get more than one egg in your basket, so you can hopefully battle through all these challenges that we're seeing.
That's fine, but I think we need to introduce some foreign species into the mix, so that wildlife can get used to those foreign species. So over a period of time, after generations, they get used to those, so that we're not going to lose out on our wildlife, our insects and things over a period of the next 100 years. So if we can gradually move into that, it might help future generations.
Yeah, again, there are lots of trials going on to see how that affects biodiversity, and again, to make sure we don't select the wrong species. So species such as eucalyptus that are just disastrous, and of course huge problems in Europe. But things like red oak, which seem to grow very well in this country, but which certainly from a timber perspective, the timber yards don't want it. But also, again, it's seen as an invasive non-native, so it can start to invade and become invasive in other, native oak woodlands and become a problem. So it's about trying to find the right species for the right job. But I do agree with you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Adam. Yes, Mr. Chapman, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up on Mr. Bolter about bringing other species in. I have a few concerns about that. We've done that with a few animal species, squirrels, sparrowhawks, crayfish, and it's not ended up too well, is it? So are we going to have the same problems if we bring other species of non-natural trees into this country? Are our insects going to adapt to them because they're used to the tree, the sap's different and everything else? I think it's something we're going to be very, very careful of, going outside what's actually natural to this country.
Yeah, if you would, please.
Yeah. Like I said, it's wait for those trials that are taking place, see how those trees perform, what's the benefits, what's the disbenefits, as it were, and they've got to be used in the right place. So in our urban environments, we're selecting trees that are much more tolerant of very, very harsh conditions. Once we reach the rural environment, we're much more reflective of the natural environment, and those trees try and buffer, enhance existing features. And again, you're absolutely right with problems. Importing tree stock. This is why we're where we are with so many pests and diseases as it is. So it is a big problem that we've got to take very cautiously.
Thank you, Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you very much, Chair. On the back of the good news, I'm afraid I'm going to do some bad news now. We've got the good news of 445,000. Don't forget about the 45,000. It's quite important. We've just had, or a year ago, delivery of 10 trees for Elizabeth Park. We've got none of them left. They're so small when they're delivered. Kids don't seem to think that little twigs will grow into big trees eventually, and they see a bit of a challenge to break this 2 centimetre round twig. So I think my message there is be careful where you put them. Obviously, clearly, a park next to a playground was the wrong place. And, good intentions from us and good intentions from forestry, but it just didn't work, and that is completely wasted. The other thing is I think that was it, actually. That was it. I've already had a very good reply from Anne telling me why I can't have a row of trees down the A607. I would love to see that, a row of trees down there, but she gives me a fully comprehensive answer as to why I can't. But everybody does love a tree, and we need to manage it. Sorry, well, they weren't trees, they were twigs. Obviously, we needed to put a sign. This will eventually grow into a tree, children. But I have identified a place in Thurmaston that is away from a playground that would be suitable. And I think I've spoken to you before, Adam, about it. So I'll get back in touch.
Yeah, give me a shout. I'd be interested to see the site that the orchard's trees failed on. But unfortunately, they are supplied as quite small trees. They're not usually we plant much larger trees, but because they're quite specialised, they do come on, sort of the right rootstock, and they aren't necessarily large. So maybe there might be something else we can do with that site.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. I'd like to thank Adam and Steve for their appearance this afternoon.
Sorry, Chair. Could I just add something, probably to the end of this? I came, to the end of this now. I didn't know you were wrapping up. I thought you were going to add something yourself. I came to the flooding forum or drop-in centre on Thursday, and it was really good, and it was well attended. Just wondered why the Canals and River Trust weren't there. Were they invited and didn't come, or I'd have thought that would have rounded it off very well. Thank you.
Just technically, they're not a risk management authority under the legislation, but absolutely, that makes no difference in terms of, us trying to engage bodies and looking at, what flood, issues there are, etc. I need to find out whether they were invited, but we certainly do try normally to engage with them. So I don't know whether it was a personnel thing or whatever, but, we do try and bring them along.
But as I say, it was very well attended, so thank you very much for putting it on.
Thank you very much for those contributions. Right, as we come to the end of our meeting, I'd like to thank the officers for all the work they've put in and the answers they've provided us with, and also the members for all of their questions. I'd like to confirm the next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on the 22nd of January at 2 p.m. And as stated earlier, there were no urgent items. So I'd like to thank you all for your attendance, wish you all well and a safe onward journey, and declare the meeting closed. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Oh, yeah. Sorry, before we all go, I'd just like to say, if I could have your attention, please. Thank you. I was very remiss. I'd just like to wish Anna really well. This is her final meeting with us, so we wish you well and a happy retirement. Yes. Thank you all. Thank you.